So imagine, picking up a biography of your country's most revered founding father.
Okay, setting the scene.
Right. You open to chapter 1, and you're fully expecting a dignified story, right? Like about his stoic birth, his noble education, maybe an early sign of his quiet wisdom.
Yeah, the standard sanitized historical introduction.
Exactly. But instead of any of that, the very first page features a terrifying demon goddess riding a mule across a literal sea of blood.
Oh, wow. Well, that definitely sets a very different kind of tone for a historical text.
It completely shatters any clean expectation you might have had. So, welcome to the deep dive. For you listening right now, we are immersing you in some truly wild, boundary-pushing source material today.
We really are. Today we're looking at excerpts from the first chapter of a book called Drukpa Kunley, Sacred Tales of a Mad Monk, offered by Needrup Zangpo.
Yes, and this is a creative nonfiction retelling, drawing on biographical and oral stories from 15th century Tibet and Bhutan. And I just have to say, when I first read this, I was absolutely floored by how the author built this narrative.
It is a stunning piece of literature. I mean, Drukpa Kunley is this legendary, larger-than-life figure in Bhutanese history, but our mission today isn't just to give you a summary of a rebellious monk's adventures.
Right. No, we're going deeper than that.
Exactly. We want to deconstruct the actual architecture of this biographical story. We're going to examine how the author weaves together incredibly rich, jarringly contrasting descriptions, blending this terrifyingly cosmic mythology with some deeply, almost uncomfortably grounded human moments.
Exactly. So if you're listening to this and wondering, why on earth should I care about a 15th century monk? Stick with us. Because we are going to trace how a narrative filled with magic and, frankly, bathroom humor serves as the rock-solid legal and historical foundation for some of the most highly respected modern institutions in Bhutan today.
Yeah, it's wild when you see where it all leads.
It really is. So treat this not as a dusty history lesson, but as a masterclass in how to build a story that a culture simply cannot forget.
And that masterclass begins immediately with how the author sets the stage. The opening scene of this chapter is a brilliant exercise in structural contrast.
Let's paint that picture for the listener. So we open on a crisp, bright winter morning in the Nankatsi village in Tibet.
Just a totally normal day.
Yeah, the sun is shining, children are running around playing, and the village elders are just sitting there, calmly eating their breakfast. It is the absolute picture of mundane, everyday tranquility.
Right up until it isn't.
Exactly. Because then, out of nowhere, this massive, thunderous sonic boom completely tears through the air. A local lama, a spiritual teacher named Drukpa Kunley, has just fired an arrow into the southern sky.
And we quickly learn this is not some random archery practice. He has just awakened from an intense prophetic dream.
Right. In the dream, he's visited by a girl wielding a blazing ritual dagger. She tells him that his ultimate destiny lies in Lomon.
Which, for the listener who might not know, Lomon was the old name for Bhutan.
Yes, and it literally translates to the southern land of darkness.
Mm-hmm.
It was called that because, at the time, it hadn't yet been fully illuminated by the light of Buddhism.
Right.
So she commands him to shoot an arrow south at sunrise to act as a messenger. And Kunley recognizes this dream girl not just as a spirit, but as the deity Palden Lhamo.
Okay, let's pause on Palden Lhamo for a second, because this is where the descriptive language just hits the reader like a freight train. Palden Lhamo is a principal Dharma protector.
Okay, let's unpack this for the listener who might be new to these concepts.
Mm-hmm.
A Dharma protector is essentially like a spiritual bodyguard for Buddhist teachings. Right?
That's a really great way to put it, yeah.
Their job is to fiercely defend the faith from obstacles.
They are spiritual bouncers, and their visual representations are designed to be terrifying to ward off evil. The text describes her wrathful iconographic form in vivid detail.
Oh, it is intense.
She is dark blue. She is riding a mule across a literal churning sea of blood. She's wearing a crown made of human skulls, and she's holding a skull cup brimming with blood.
It is an intensely visceral, horrific image, which actually brings me to a structural choice the author made that I really want to challenge.
Okay, let's hear it.
If you have this incredibly dramatic, blood-soaked prophecy involving a deity on a sea of blood, why not lead with that? Why bury the lead and start with a sunny morning, kids playing, and villagers holding breakfast bowls?
Well, what's fascinating here is that this specific structural choice does something absolutely vital for a biographical myth. It forces the mythology to exist within an everyday, relatable reality.
Okay, how so?
Think about it. If the author starts page 1 with a blue goddess on a sea of blood, you, the reader, are instantly placed in the realm of high fantasy.
Oh, I see. You're just reading a fairy tale at that point. It's safe. It's totally separate from your world.
Precisely. But by starting with those villagers dropping their breakfast bowls because a sonic boom just shattered their quiet morning, the author makes the divine intervention feel like a physical, disruptive event.
It grounds it.
Exactly. The myth has mass. It has volume. It interrupts breakfast. It forces the reader to accept the premise that in this specific narrative, the sacred and the mundane are sharing the exact same physical space.
The myth has mass. Man, I really love that framing. And because that arrow has been launched into reality, the story doesn't just stay in that village.
No, it really takes off, literally.
Right. The narrative structure brilliantly splits into two parallel tracks.
Mhm.
You have the magical flight of the arrow in the sky, and you have the physical, sensory journey of the monk walking on the ground trying to follow it.
And this dual journey is one of the most compelling structural elements of the entire biography. The author uses wildly different descriptive techniques for each track.
Well, let's look at the arrow first, because this is wild. As it flies over the Himalayas, it doesn't just pass over the landscape, it literally reshapes the geography.
It's basically divine terraforming.
Yes. The arrow soars over the mountains, and it brushes against a mountain crest with so much force that it leaves a massive dent. A dent so distinct that the mountain looks like the notch of an arrow, which is why that location today is known as Arrow Notch Monastery.
And it doesn't stop there.
No. Then the arrow tears through the crown of another mountain entirely, carving out a permanent V-shaped groove.
It is leaving massive, permanent scars on the earth. And finally, the arrow lands in a region called Punaka, specifically at the home of a wealthy man named Top Chawang and his beautiful wife, Rigden Norbu Dzoma.
Right?
It strikes an 11-step wooden ladder at their house with such incredible force that the entire building rocks like it's in an earthquake.
And the husband goes out to investigate, right?
He does. The husband tries to pull the arrow out of the wood with all his might, but he can't budge it at all. However, when his wife steps up and pulls it, the text uses this brilliant description. It says the arrow comes out like a strand of hair from a lump of butter.
Oh, wow. Let's just appreciate that simile for a moment. Like a stranded hair from a lump of butter. It is so deeply tactile.
It really is.
For a 15th century agrarian audience sitting around a fire listening to this story, pulling a hair out of freshly churned butter is a sensory experience they all know intimately. It instantly communicates the frictionless magic of that moment.
Exactly. It bridges the magical event with a completely ordinary sensory touchpoint.
Meanwhile, while this arrow is acting like a divine, unstoppable GPS pin drop, Drukpa Kunley is taking his own journey. And here's where it gets really interesting. Because if the arrow represents this awe-inspiring, world-altering divine path, Kunley's earthly path is structured like a buddy comedy montage of earthly desires.
Yeah, he is decidedly not acting like a traditional, pious, holy man.
Not even slightly. He recalls an old woman once telling him that the southern lands have the absolute best change, which is a local fermented alcoholic drink, and the most beautiful women.
And his reaction is telling.
His reaction is basically, great, I'm heading south for the booze and the bells.
Yeah.
As he is trekking through these perilous freezing mountain passes, the author slows the narrative down to focus on his physical body. He stops to drink from a glacial lake, and then, right before he arrives at the village where the arrow landed, he casually pulls down his robe and pees right next to a public footpath.
Just right out in the open.
Right there.
Oh.
And some local kids walk by, point at him, giggle, and tell him his genitals are unusually long.
Oh my.
I know. And instead of scolding them or covering up, he just smiles and jokes back that it's the season of long and dangling genitals.
If you look closely at the descriptive language, the contrast between these two journeys is completely intentional.
Really? How so?
Well, the arrow is described through its massive permanent impact on the external world, right? The carved mountains, the shaking houses. It is distant, powerful, and untouchable. Kunley, on the other hand, is described entirely through fleeting, intimate, deeply human sensory experiences.
Which is such a weird choice for a revered religious figure. I mean, most biographies would edit out the bathroom jokes.
True. But those details are crucial for oral histories. Think back to that scene at the glacial lake you mentioned.
Yep.
The text is incredibly specific. It describes Kunley cupping his hands, drinking deeply, and his throat momentarily constricting from the shock of the ice-cold water.
Right, it's very visceral.
It describes him feeling every mouthful coursing down his esophagus into his stomach, providing this refreshing bodily sensation. He closes his eyes and turns this simple physical act into a meditative moment. He sees a flock of blue sheep on the ridge. He feels the biting cold of the wind.
He is totally grounded in his physical form.
Yes. Structurally, the author is establishing Kunley as the ultimate bridge between the divine represented by the unstoppable arrow and the profane, represented by his crude, physical, vulnerable human body.
That makes a lot of sense.
The humor and the bodily functions make him intensely memorable to an audience that didn't have written records. You remember the guy who makes a joke about his anatomy? You might forget a guy who just silently meditates for a week.
So true. He's a walking contradiction, designed to stick in your memory. But structurally speaking, you cannot have two parallel tracks like this, the sacred world-altering arrow and the profane crude monk, without them eventually crashing into each other.
Exactly. Which brings us to the inevitable climax at the house in Punakha.
The moment the two journeys finally collide. So Kunley arrives at the house of Top Shuang. He casually walks up and asks if his arrow landed there. And then the wife, Rigden Norbu Dzoma, walks into the room.
And at this exact moment, the author's tone shifts dramatically.
It does. The descriptions suddenly become incredibly rich, poetic, and highly stylized. She appears like a spring bloom. The text says her face is a fresh blossom, her dark eyes hover like bees, and her lips are like the supple petals of a coral flower.
It's a classic, idealized depiction of beauty, which immediately heightens the narrative tension. It signals to the reader that this isn't just a casual encounter. This woman is highly significant.
And Kunley doesn't just politely admire her from afar either. He declares that his arrow has found its mark, tells the husband to step aside, and says, "I need your wife."
He really just goes for it.
He simply pulls her into an embrace. Naturally, the husband, Top Shuang, is absolutely furious.
Yeah.
I mean, a strange man wanders into his house and grabs his wife.
Completely understandable reaction.
He unsheathes his sword, completely enraged, yelling about how this kind of behavior might fly up in Tibet, but it's an atrocity down here. He is fully prepared to kill Kunley on the spot.
The tension hits its absolute peak right here. The earthly rules of marriage, hospitality, and violent retaliation are colliding head-on with Kunley's divine mandate.
And here's the twist. Kunley, with his right arm still wrapped around the wife's neck, just casually reaches out with his bare left hand, catches the sharp blade of the husband's sword, and physically twists the solid metal into a tight knot.
Just bends it like it's nothing.
Like a pretzel. The husband is so utterly awestruck by this impossible feat that he instantly drops all his rage. He drops to his knees, submits, calls Kunley a living Buddha, and basically offers him his wife and his lifelong patronage right then and there.
It's quite the turnaround.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because as a reader in the modern world, this moment gives me serious pause. Are we supposed to interpret the twisted sword as a literal historical magic trick that happened in physical reality? Or is the author using this bending of metal as a structural metaphor?
That's a great question.
Like, is the physical bending of the sword meant to represent how a true spiritual master can instantly disarm human anger and bend rigid social constructs to his will?
This raises an important point about how we read biographical myths. The beauty of this text is that it functions as both. But strictly, structurally speaking, it serves as a narrative mic drop. It is the ultimate paradigm shift in the story.
Let's dig into that paradigm shift.
Yeah.
Because before this moment, the husband is fully justified in his anger.
Exactly. Up until this point, the husband was operating under earthly logic and strict societal rules. The rule is, you do not touch another man's wife. If you do, there will be violence.
Right, that's just how the world works.
And the husband's sword represents the enforcement of that human law. But by taking that sword and twisting it into a knot with his bare hand, Kunley physically breaks the laws of physics.
That's undeniable proof.
Yes. That visual demonstration proves to the husband and to us, the readers, that Kunley's spiritual power supersedes all earthly logic.
You cannot fight a divine prophecy with a piece of steel.
You really can't. The rules you thought govern the universe simply do not apply to this monk. It's a climax that shatters the established order. And it's perfectly summarized by a local saying that was actually born from this very incident.
Oh, there's a saying.
Yeah. The saying goes, Topa Shuang loves the Dharma, carefree Kunley loves the hostess. May the Dharma lover and hostess lover bring good luck.
Wow, that is amazing.
It takes this incredibly chaotic, contradictory, legally messy moment and solidifies it into a beloved cultural memory.
But a climax that just ends in a chaotic wife-stealing incident and a bent sword doesn't build a lasting historical legacy. And remember, this is a biography of a founding figure. It has to lead somewhere real.
Right. The story can't just end there.
So the narrative makes one final massive structural shift. It transitions from this wild, magical, rule-breaking myth into a highly documented, incredibly dry historical family tree.
It pivots entirely from the magical to the genealogical. But notice how it transitions. The myth still interacts with the physical landscape before it settles into history.
Oh, right. Because before we get to the family tree, Kunley actually decides to stay in the village for a while.
Huh.
And while he's there, he deals with a terrifying local demon.
As one does.
As one does. But he doesn't just fight it. He literally subdues the demon by sealing it inside a massive boulder. And the text describes how the boulder itself seems to be pleading for mercy because the demon trapped inside is begging.
See, it's another example of the supernatural being anchored into the physical, touchable geography of Bhutan. You can point to the rock.
Exactly.
Mm.
But from there, the story shifts gears completely into historical documentation. Kunley has a son with Rigden Norbu Dzoma named Gawang Tenzin, and this son becomes the progenitor of a massive, influential lineage.
The grandson, Chowan Tenzin, becomes a huge patron of the Buddhist Dharma in Bhutan.
This is where the historical footprint becomes undeniable.
Yes, because in 1616, that grandson hosts Zhabdrung Ngawang Namgyal.
Now, if you don't know Bhutanese history, Zhabdrung Ngawang Namgyal is basically a George Washington-level founding father figure. He unified the country.
And Kunley's grandson offers this unifier Tango monastery and oversees the construction of Cherry Monastery. These actions institute Bhutan's very first monastic order.
The wild story of the arrow and the twisted sword has now directly resulted in the bricks and mortar of the country's most important religious institutions.
And it keeps going. Kunley's great-grandson eventually becomes the temporal ruler of Bhutan.
And while Kunley's direct family bloodline eventually ends there, his spiritual lineage continues through reincarnation, unbroken, all the way to today.
That's incredible.
The 8th reincarnation of Drukpa Kunley is currently the chief abbot of Tango University of Buddhist Studies, which is the highest seat of learning for this entire tradition in modern Bhutan. So what does this all mean?
Well, structurally, it's a masterpiece.
When I look at this structurally, my mind is blown. It is the equivalent of discovering that a bizarre, chaotic fairy tale involving a blood-drinking goddess, a guy making anatomy jokes and twisting swords into knots, is actually the foundational legal bedrock for a major modern university.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what the author has done here structurally is build a massive narrative funnel.
Wait, so you're saying the narrative acts like a funnel, taking this massive cosmic energy and literally squeezing it down?
Yes. Think about the scope of the story we just walked through. It starts incredibly wide, cosmic, and terrifying. A blue deity riding across a churning sea of blood in a dream prophecy.
Right.
That's the widest, most ethereal part of the funnel. Then, the story narrows down to geography. The arrow reshaping mountains and carving physical valleys.
Okay, I see where you're going.
Then it funnels down even tighter to a single specific wooden ladder at a household in Punakha, creating a highly localized human conflict over a wife and a sword.
And then, where does all that compressed energy go?
All of that compressed, mythical, spiritual, and chaotic energy pours out of the bottom of the funnel directly into tangible historical reality.
Wow.
It pours into human bloodlines, it pours into the physical construction of Tango and Cherry monasteries, and it animates institutions that are operating right now, today, in modern Bhutan.
The myth literally births the reality.
Exactly. By structuring the biography this way, the author is making a profound argument. They are saying that the modern, highly revered institutions of today are directly animated by the chaotic, divine, and fiercely human energy of Drukpa Kunley.
You can't have one without the other.
Right. Without the sea of blood, without the twisted sword, and frankly, without the deeply human, inappropriate desires of the monk, the Tango University of Buddhist Studies doesn't exist. You cannot separate the messy, vulgar humanity from the pristine, divine legacy. They are fundamentally intertwined.
That is such a brilliant way to view this text. It isn't just a list of things a guy did. The structure itself is an argument for embracing the chaos of history.
Absolutely.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive today. We've explored how this biographical excerpt from Drukpa Kunley's Sacred Tales of a Mad Monk utilizes the collision of incredibly rich sensory descriptions.
The terrifyingly divine and the unapologetically vulgar.
Yes, the magical and the strictly historical. It uses all of that to construct a story that is simply impossible for a culture to forget. It doesn't just give you a timeline. It makes you feel the heavy disruptive weight of myth crashing right into the reality of a sunny morning breakfast.
As you process all of this, I'd encourage you to think about how the stories of your own life or your own country's history are structured.
Ooh, that's a great point.
Do we have a tendency to sanitize our histories? Do we smooth out all the rough edges and edit out the bathroom jokes to make our heroes more palatable?
Usually, yes.
Right. Or do we have the courage to embrace the messy, contradictory, sometimes highly inappropriate details that actually make those histories vibrant, human, and memorable?
It really makes you rethink what a biography should even try to accomplish. If lasting historical authority and profoundly revered religious lineages can be founded on a story this rebellious, this rule-breaking, and this humorous, what does that say about our modern rigid expectations that historical figures must have perfect sanitized origin stories?
It's definitely something to chew on.
For sure. Maybe a little bit of chaos and a few twisted swords are exactly what a true, lasting legacy requires.